Moses. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, his name echoes through thousands of years of faith and history. He is the baby pulled from a river, the man who dares to confront a king, and the leader who walks a nation through the sea and into freedom. His story is not just about miracles and signs. It is also about fear, failure, calling, and a God who does not give up on imperfect people. The story of Moses begins in Egypt, at a time when the Israelites were living as slaves. Long before, they had come to Egypt during a famine and were welcomed. But generations passed. A new Pharaoh rose to power, one who did not remember Joseph or the good the Israelites had once done for Egypt. All he saw was a foreign people who were growing in number and strength. He was afraid they might one day join Egypt's enemies or escape and weaken his kingdom. Out of fear, he chose cruelty. He forced the Israelites into hard labor, building cities and working in the fields, hoping to crush their spirit. But even under oppression, the Israelites kept growing. So Pharaoh made a terrifying decision. He ordered that every baby boy born to the Hebrews be killed. Girls could live, but the boys were to be thrown into the Nile River. In the middle of this darkness, an Israelite couple from the tribe of Levi had a son. They hid him for 3 months, trying to keep his cries quiet, doing everything they could to protect him from Pharaoh's command. Eventually, they realized they could not hide him any longer. His mother made a painful, desperate choice. She coated a basket with tar and pitch so it would float, placed her baby inside, and set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile. She did all she could do, and then she had to let go and trust that God would do what she could not. The baby's older sister, Miriam, watched from a distance to see what would happen to him. Soon, Pharaoh's daughter came down to the river to bathe. She noticed the basket among the reeds and sent one of her attendants to fetch it. When she opened it and saw the crying baby inside, her heart was moved with compassion. She knew immediately that this was one of the Hebrew babies, a child her own father's law said should be killed. Instead, she chose mercy. She decided to raise him as her own son. At that moment, Miriam stepped forward and offered to find a Hebrew woman to nurse the child. Pharaoh's daughter agreed, and without knowing it, she handed the baby back into the arms of his own mother. For a time, Moses was raised in the safety of his family's love, and then he was brought into Pharaoh's palace and adopted into the royal household. He grew up surrounded by wealth, education, and power. He learned the language, customs, and wisdom of Egypt. On the outside, he looked like an Egyptian prince, but he never completely forgot that he was a Hebrew, part of the very people his adoptive family was oppressing. As Moses grew older, the tension between his two worlds became impossible to ignore. One day, when he was around 40 years old, he went out to see his own people and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew slave, one of his own people. Anger welled up inside him. He looked this way and that, and seeing no one, he attacked the Egyptian and killed him. Then he hid the body in the sand, thinking no one had seen what he had done. The next day, Moses went out again and saw 2 Hebrews fighting each other. He tried to break it up and asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" But the man replied, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you going to kill me as you killed the Egyptian?" In that instant, Moses realized that his secret was not a secret at all. Word would spread. Pharaoh would hear. His act of violence had not solved anything. It had only put his own life in danger. When Pharaoh learned what Moses had done, he tried to have him killed. Moses had no choice but to run. He fled Egypt, leaving behind the palace, the influence, the identity he had known for years. The Prince of Egypt became a fugitive. He crossed the desert and arrived in the land of Midian, far away from the world he once knew. In Midian, at a well, Moses came across some shepherd women being harassed by other shepherds who tried to drive them away. Moses stepped in to defend them and helped them water their flock. Their father, a priest of Midian named Reuel, also called Jethro, invited Moses to stay with them. Over time, Moses settled into this new life. He married Zipporah, one of Jethro's daughters, and they had a son. Moses became a shepherd, caring for his father-in-law's sheep in the quiet wilderness. Years passed. Moses, once a man of influence in one of the greatest civilizations on earth, now walked alone with animals through open fields and rocky hillsides. On the outside, his life looked ordinary, even small. On the inside, Moses may have carried memories of failure, shame, and questions about whether he had ruined whatever purpose his life once had. Meanwhile, back in Egypt, the Israelites groaned under their slavery. They cried out for help, and God heard their cries and remembered his promise to their ancestors. One day, Moses was tending the flock near Horeb, the mountain of God. As he walked, he noticed something strange. A bush that was on fire, but the flames did not consume it. The branches did not burn up. The fire did not fade. Curious, Moses decided to go closer and see this unusual sight. As he approached, a voice called to him from the bush, saying, "Moses, Moses," Moses answered. "Here I am." The voice said, "Do not come any closer. Take off your sandals, for the place where you are standing is holy ground." Moses obeyed. The voice continued, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." Moses realized he was standing in the presence of the living God. Afraid to look, he hid his face. God told Moses that he had indeed seen the misery of his people in Egypt. He had heard their cries and was concerned about their suffering. He declared that he had come down to rescue them from the Egyptians and to bring them into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. Then came a shocking command. "So now go, I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people the Israelites out of Egypt." Moses did not respond with confidence. He did not say, "Finally, my big moment." Instead he said, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He knew his past. He knew he was a wanted man in Egypt. He knew his weaknesses. God answered him with a simple, powerful promise. "I will be with you." Moses had more questions. He asked what he should say if the Israelites wanted to know who had sent him. God revealed his name, saying, "I am who I am. Tell them I am has sent you." Moses still worried that the people would not believe him or listen to him. So God gave Moses signs. His staff turned into a snake, and then back into a staff. His hand became diseased, and then was healed. These signs would show that God was truly with him. Even with these signs, Moses hesitated. He said, "Pardon your servant, Lord. I have never been eloquent. I am slow of speech and tongue." God replied, "Who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say." Still, Moses pleaded, "Please send someone else." Moses did not feel like a hero or a leader. He felt inadequate, unqualified, and afraid. Yet God did not give up on him. God allowed Moses' brother Aaron to be his spokesman. Moses would receive God's words, and Aaron would speak them to the people and to Pharaoh. With this arrangement, and with God's promise to be with him, Moses finally returned to Egypt, not as an Egyptian prince, but as a servant of God carrying a message of freedom. Back in Egypt, Moses and Aaron gathered the elders of the Israelites and told them what God had said. They performed the signs, and the people believed that God had seen their misery and intended to rescue them. Then Moses and Aaron went to Pharaoh and delivered God's command. "Let my people go, so that they may worship me in the wilderness." Pharaoh responded with scorn. He said, "Who is the Lord, that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." Instead of easing their burden, Pharaoh made their work even harder. The people began to question Moses, and Moses himself cried out to God, confused and discouraged. God answered that he would show his power and that Pharaoh would eventually let the people go. Then a series of plagues struck Egypt. The Nile, the lifeblood of the land, turned to blood. Frogs swarmed everywhere. Gnats and flies filled the air. Livestock died. Painful boils afflicted people and animals. Hail fell from the sky, destroying crops. Locusts devoured what was left. Thick darkness covered the land. Each plague revealed the weakness of Egypt's gods and the hardness of Pharaoh's heart. Again and again, Pharaoh promised to let the Israelites go, and then changed his mind when the trouble paused. Finally came the 10th and most devastating plague. God announced that every firstborn in Egypt would die, from the house of Pharaoh to the lowest servant, unless there was a sign of obedience and trust. God told the Israelites to sacrifice a lamb and put some of its blood on the sides and top of their doorframes. That night, when judgment came, it would pass over any house marked by the blood. The Israelites obeyed. In the middle of the night, a great cry rose in Egypt as death struck the firstborn in homes that had not followed God's instruction. In the houses of the Israelites, where the blood marked the doors, the children were spared. Broken by grief and fear, Pharaoh finally called Moses and Aaron and ordered them to leave Egypt with all their people and their flocks. After centuries of slavery, the Israelites walked out of Egypt as a free people. They did not leave empty-handed. Many Egyptians gave them silver, gold, and clothing. Moses led them out, trusting that God would guide them. But the journey was not smooth. Soon after they left, Pharaoh changed his mind yet again. He gathered his army and chased after the Israelites, overtaking them as they camped by the Red Sea. Trapped between the sea in front of them and Pharaoh's chariots behind them, the people panicked. They cried out in fear, and even accused Moses of bringing them out to the desert to die. In that moment, Moses spoke words that still echo through history. "Do not be afraid, stand firm, and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today." God told Moses to stretch out his staff over the sea. As he did, the water parted, and a dry path opened up through the middle, with walls of water on either side. The Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. When Pharaoh's army followed, the waters returned to their place and swept the soldiers away. The people of Israel saw that God had rescued them from their enemies. On the far shore, they sang songs of praise and celebrated. Miriam, Moses' sister, led the women in dancing with tambourines, singing about the Lord's victory. Freedom, however, was only the beginning. Now the Israelites had to learn how to live as God's people. They faced hunger and thirst in the wilderness. When they complained, God provided manna, bread from heaven and water from a rock. When enemies attacked, God gave them victory. Along the way, they arrived at Mount Sinai, the same region where Moses had once seen the burning bush. There, God called Moses up the mountain once again. In thick cloud and thunder, God made a covenant with the people and gave them his law. At the heart of this law were the 10 Commandments, instructions to worship only God, to avoid idols, to honor God's name and the Sabbath, to respect parents, and to reject murder, adultery, theft, lying, and coveting. These commands were not just rules, they were a way of life for a people meant to reflect God's character in the world. Moses became the mediator between God and the people, carrying God's words down from the mountain and bringing the people's needs back up to God in prayer. He spent long periods in God's presence. At one point when he came down, his face shone with a brightness that frightened the people, so he covered it with a veil. Yet even with such clear guidance and miracles, the Israelites still struggled. When Moses was on the mountain for a long time, they grew impatient and made a golden calf to worship. Moses, grieved and angry, had to confront them and call them back to faithfulness. Moses' journey was not easy. He faced constant complaints, rebellion, and heavy responsibility. At times he grew frustrated and angry. In one incident, instead of following God's exact instructions in providing water, he struck a rock in anger. Because of this act of disobedience, God told Moses that he would see the promised land from a distance, but would not enter it himself. Near the end of his life, Moses climbed a mountain and looked out over the land that God had promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He saw the hills, valleys, and rivers of the place his people were about to enter. He had led them out of slavery, guided them through the wilderness, and prepared them to be a nation, even though he would not cross the border with them. Moses died there, and God himself, the Bible says, buried him in a place no one knows. Despite his failures and weaknesses, Moses is remembered as a prophet, a lawgiver, and a shepherd of God's people. He spoke with God face to face, as one speaks to a friend. He stood between a holy God and a stubborn people pleading for mercy and guidance. His life shows that God can use someone who feels unqualified, someone with a painful past and real flaws, to do something world-changing. Today, the story of Moses still speaks to us. It calls us to stand up against injustice, even when it is risky. It invites us to trust that God hears the cries of the oppressed. It reminds us that our failures do not have to be the end of our story, and that feeling inadequate does not disqualify us from being used by God. Like Moses, we may find ourselves in our own deserts, places of waiting or confusion. Yet even there, God can speak, call, and lead us into a purpose greater than anything we had planned for ourselves.